Uh, in this questioning and inventive new book, Danny constructs 7 perfect average children from millions of statistics, complicating a picture of a socially divided nation that often focuses only on the super rich and the most deprived. 7 Children really is essential reading for anyone who wants to understand the future of Britain's next generation. Danny is a social scientist and author whose books include Inequality in the 1% and Shattered Nation, most recently, and among many, many others. He's written for The Guardian, The New Statesman, Financial Times, and he's the Harold Mackinder Professor of Geography at the University of Oxford. Polly is a Guardian columnist, as I'm sure you all know. Her books include An Uneasy Inheritance, My Family and Other Radicals, and The Only Way Is Up, How to Take Britain from Austerity to Prosperity, which was co-authored by David Walker, and those books are on sale over there after the event as well. Danny and Polly are going to be talking for about 40-45 minutes, then there'll be some time for your questions, and there'll be a assignment at the event too. But without further ado, join me in giving a very warm welcome to Danny Dorling and Polly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank all of you for coming. We're talking about Professor of Geography. People of my age who remember geography, it was nothing like the sort of geography that you teach, the sort of social science that you do now. I mean, Danny's books are remarkable. They are encyclopedias of our social geography. Time after time, he finds a new way of trying to expose, reveal, make alive how we live, and mostly how we live in such grotesque inequality, and looking for new ways to say it every time. You have very imaginative, different ways of doing it, of exploring it. I mean, sometimes it's through housing, sometimes it's through different issues. But this one, 7 children, taking 7 imaginary children, dividing up in the population as to where they stand socially, what their incomes are, what their families' incomes are, how they are, how their lives are likely to pan out. I mean, it's full of terrific, useful charts like this one. I mean, this tells you all you need to know about the 7 children. There's what the rich child has, 7 in the top, Sunday's child. And here is Monday's child, the poorest child. And that shows the distribution of income between these children, imaginary children, all born in 2018. And there's good reasons why you chose 2018. Perhaps we should start with that, and then maybe you describe the children a bit.
Okay, thank you, Polly. And thank you for that introduction. That's very kind. I've got a co-author called Sally Tomlinson, who is now in her 80s, let's say, who once told me that you have to write books again and again and again. You can't just write one and stop, particularly at a time when things are getting worse. And this happened in the past. You can look back to 1910, 1920s, 1930s, and it wasn't great. And we've been in that kind of period. So there's a sense in which this is depressing, but you have to find different ways to do it, and things do change. I picked 2018 partly because I'm increasingly convinced that that was the year that could be our greatest ever inequality. Things could...
Ever?
Oh, no. It was...
Ever since what, 1900?
Ever since, about since about 1926.
26.
So the last maximum was 1918. It was worse in 1918. Immediately after 1918, things got better, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Nobody noticed, apart from a young PhD student called Hugh Dalton at the LSE, who later became Chancellor in the 1950s. He did his PhD on it, but it was only Hugh Dalton. Half of the equality we gained between 1918 and the 60s was gained by 1939. So most of it in the 20s and the 30s. Nobody remembers the 20s and the 30s happily. General strike, mass unemployment. but the big families were having to give up their country houses and their servants, and actually things were getting better. It's only in the 40s that that began to be realised, or the acceptance of society is changing. So in the start of the book, I mention old books around about £1 a week from 1913, 14. I think I might mention Brideshead Revisited, which was about the 20s, but not published until 1944, 45. And Inspector Calls, which is if you're of a certain age and did O-level or GCSE, and it's sad this country, we no longer teach these things that we used to teach every child. And Inspector Calls is about what happens when you lose your morals. But that wasn't published by Priestley until around about 44, 45. And we're in a similar period now where it's as bad as the 1920s. We're torn apart like 1920s. We have a politics in a way like 1920s, oscillating governments, incredible voting one way or another. But it may be getting better. That's why I picked 2018. It's made incredibly confusing by the pandemic. But it
may be getting better.
Well, the inequality statistics, it's in the footnote to the book, so I'm ever so cautious, but I'm telling you because I'm hopeful. Benefits have gone up with inflation recently. State benefits, state pensions gone up with inflation. Wages have gone up slightly less. All the wage deals there have been in the last 2 or 4 years have been progressive. If you take the Communication Workers Union in the private sector, working for BT, in 2018, 2019, they had a flat 3% for everybody, which meant that the senior male engineering experts were getting the highest increase, 3% on their high salary. The last couple of years, the Communication Workers Union pay deal is incredibly complicated, and the highest increase goes to the workers at the bottom because they have to eat. Yeah. Civil servants, since 2008, senior civil servants have had a 25% real pay cut. Junior civil servants, 12. So the gap between civil servants has narrowed. Now, you sometimes and increasingly see a few Conservatives mention this, and it's highly annoying. There was an extremely annoying far-right person who I won't name who tweeted today and copied me in about, oh, look, our Gini coefficient is lower now than 2008, as if trying to get credit for it.
Well, do they not get any credit for that?
They didn't, the Tory party enjoy, like, love, worship inequality. Let's be just clear, and our Tory party is extreme in the world and in Europe. It was the Financial Times and John Murdoch who produced a graph a couple of years ago, simply reporting on all political scientists in the world who were surveyed, that actually had the British Conservative Party as the most far-right economically on the planet of all political parties in high-income and middle-income countries. Right? And that's extreme. That really, and this is the FT. So, and we have, part of the book is trying to explain, and part of the reason of starting in 2018 is you're incredibly unequal and incredibly weird compared to the rest of the continent, compared to your decades before. This is abnormal. Politically, it then becomes more abnormal. We get Boris. We then get the wonderful 49 days of Liz. We then get Sunak, who was just as bad as Liz, in terms of his ridiculous thoughts. He wrote 3 very short books, so you can actually look up what Sunak actually believed about the world. But that chaotic politics came after and during a pandemic in which you simply had to take some money off the rich or tell the top people not. The Bank of England instructed the top bankers not to take excessive pay rises while they were furloughing their workers. Our ratio of top CEO pay to the average is still not as high as it was before the pandemic. This is touch and go. We're on a plateau. we are on a plateau, slightly more equal than we were in 2018, 2019.
Without any political will for it.
With very little, except of course for the election, which was a political will for something different. And this is what makes me most hopeful. I don't think, and I don't know them, so I'm not being fair, I don't think Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves were particularly driven by a need for greater equality. They wanted growth and to reduce poverty. But the mood music this summer of things can only get worse and prepare yourself, they're going to be forced to increase taxes on the rich. It had already begun. I'm happy for them to take credit, by the way, for this. I will try really hard to be quiet and say it began in 2018. If they do this, they're going to have to tax the rich more this autumn. They're going to have to increase benefits for people who are poor, slightly more than average wages. Otherwise, people will freeze to death still. And that's how it reluctantly happened in the 1920s. We had a real cost of living crisis. We had real wages went down. Members of Parliament took a pay cut, which in effect they've taken recently compared to inflation. It's not identical at all, it's different. And remember in the 20s, we just had a revolution in Russia, and that helped sharpen minds to what might happen if you weren't nice to people. But I really, honestly, my gut instinct is that we're at the turn, but it's going to be similar to the past in that the next 2 decades are going to feel absolutely awful because we become more equal at the same time as we become collectively poorer. It isn't necessary for it to be awful if we just grasped it and just said, we're going to be a bit poorer. The whole of Europe's going to be a bit poorer. You start off with VAT on private schools. That's just where you start. Then you increase the wealth taxes on, which will include those people who send their children there and so on. Not a huge amount, but if you were simply to accept that we're heading towards being like Germany, it wouldn't feel so bad. And there are things you can do that would make life more tolerable. And I think we're heading towards a more equal society. It's just that we're kind of kicking and screaming against it and shouting growth, 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 growth. And we're still shouting it's okay if people make lots of money as long as they pay their taxes. And we ought to be saying, look.
It's not clear that's what this government's going to say, because it looks as if that in the budget, we'll perhaps come to that later, they're going to take quite a lot of all unearned income of one form or another.
Oh, and it's absolutely fascinating. I think they're almost obliged to by the circumstances, not the 20 billion black hole. I mean, that's tiny, that's just in the error. It's the reality, which I have in the book, of children literally becoming shorter since 2010.
Yes.
Nowhere else in Europe are children becoming shorter.
Yep.
Absolute rises in...
Relatively shorter.
No, absolutely shorter. No, right. And we're only just getting this data. It was published last summer for the UK as a whole, that from 210 onwards for 5-year-olds, which is worrying for the old Labour track because it began in 2005, which kind of matters, but much worse after 210. The only equivalent we know in Europe is a tiny decrease in heights in Germany for a few years when they let in 1.5 million Syrians, half of whom are children. Right? So this is nothing to do with immigration because we don't let in refugees.
No.
We know from a Freedom of Information request, this is my working life sort. We know from an FOI done by a GP in Oxford that the heights of children in Scotland has been rising. We know the overall UK fall. England will not release the heights. It'll release every year the BMI, how fat our kids are. But BMI is weight divided by height squared. So they've got height, but they won't release the heights. The kids are getting shorter. We've written to Wes. But in a situation where your children are literally getting shorter, it's like when we had the war in South Africa, the Boer War, and we lost it because we're in that terrible situation again, and the rest of Europe doesn't have shrinking children. And at that point, unless you are an extreme conservative who really believes the devil takes the hindmost and it doesn't matter if people die and are immiserated.
But that's not their answer. Their answer is it's feckless parents. If only they wouldn't smoke and have Sky TV.
Yeah.
Then they would, feed their children on nutritious lentils that are quite cheap, and porridge. The doctrine of porridge is round about £1 a week. Talks about how they're being lectured all the time about porridge. Yeah. But let's just go back.
But that's partly why that's partly why I wrote a book like this, because I write about the everyday decisions.
Yeah.
I write about putting things back from the supermarket shelves. We were talking about this when it costs too much.
Well, you have a very good description on exactly what your poorest child, an extremely unfeckless mother, what she spends and how she spends her money, which she earns as a senior care worker. And she ends up with a disposable income after rent of £118 a week, or £16.86 a day, of which a fifth, £3.37, is spent on her child's food, clothes, and other needs. Everything. £3.37, less than a posh coffee, you say. And that makes you think every time you buy a coffee in a railway station. But let's stick to that book for a minute. Let's anchor it with those 7 children. Just give a thumbnail sketch for people here
of them,
because they are absolutely fascinating, and it has that kind of raw detail in it.
Yeah, it's odd because for me they're completely real. I tried once before. I wrote a book called The Central Line, which is partly fiction. It's really hard. So for me, they're real. There were 14 million children in 2018, they're now 14.5. You line them all up by the income of their families. You have 7 groups of 2 million, and you take the middle child of every 7. Why 7? Because the government publishes for quintiles, fifths of the population, and 28% of children live in the poorest fifth. 28% is double a seventh, a seventh is 14%. Another roughly 28% live in the next fifth. 4 out of our 7 children live in the 2 poorest fifths. So 2 of them in the poorest fifth, 2 of them in the next poorest, 1 in the average fifth, 1 in the slightly better off, 1 in the best off. They go, Anna, her name changed, but anyway, she's Anna. 1 million children are poorer than Anna. So Anna never goes to a food bank. Anna's mum never goes to a food bank. We're not talking absolute destitution. Anna has a bed. Anna's life is ordered. Anna's mum is incredibly well controlled and budgets brilliantly, better than any of the other families. And that's why she's not in the next million down.
It's because on 337,
Yeah. Oh, for bus tickets.
You lose your anorak.
Yeah.
The whole budget the kid loses their anorak or somebody nicks it at school.
Yeah.
That entire budget is gone for the month.
It goes, she's got to keep a phone going for herself, the mum. It is, it's heart-wrenching. It's done for love. There is no dad, by the way, which fits more likely in. He's caring. He's somewhere else, but it didn't work. Her nerves are worn to fiddle strings, which is a phrase that appeared in around about £1 a week. £118 a week in 2018, adjusted for inflation, is exactly £1 in 1913-14.
Is that sad?
Which was the respectable working class of Lambeth.
It's exactly that family.
It's exactly.
Yes.
So for the very poorest, and we're not destitute, for a child in the middle of the bottom 7th, in many ways, nothing has got better in over 100 years. Yes, mum's got a mobile phone because that's the way you do work, right? It's not a luxury, it's necessity. She's not freezing, because in the past people could. There aren't any savings, whereas in the past there would have been the funeral payments, which were actually a form of saving unless a child died, in which you'll pay for the funeral. But for our poorest one child in the seventh, in many, many ways, life is very similar to what it was over 110 years ago. The next child is Brandon. Brandon's from a larger family. Anna's just a lone child. Brandon's family, Brandon's dad and mum don't work. They're relying on benefits. They've got more. Brandon's dad is an expert on using the computer and filling in the forms. So works out how just about to do it. And he's still in the poorest fifth. They're still in the poorest fifth, but getting by slightly better, which shows that work doesn't pay, because Anna's mum is working as a senior care worker and actually is poorer than Brandon's family. Next, you've got Candice, who's the first child in the second fifth, third of our 7 children. And then you have David, who's our average child, but still in the second poorest quintile of households. David has a sister who's on free school meals because they got them when they were poorer, and because of legacy reasons, she can still claim free school meals. But David's sister fails to actually eat, because unless you pick exactly the right food from the canteen, they will send you back from the till, because the privatised canteen in the school is designed to prevent a child getting their free school meals. That's an anecdote from a colleague. So the book is largely statistics, but includes real stories from people. Then we go up and we get to Emily, and I haven't memorised it exactly. I think Emily's dad's now driving buses. It was actually a Guardian story I used at the beginning of this, which is right in the beginning of the book, where the Guardian described the average occupation of people in different groups. So that's where I started. And then Freddie is our slightly affluent child. And we'll skip over him for saying then Gemma. And of course, you're all interested in Gemma. You know, what's our posh girl like? And they go girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. And of course, A, B, C, D, E, if you've noticed, because it makes it easier for me. Gemma is a middle child of the top 2 million. And that's really important, because it's well above Gemma that you get what you might think of as affluence. So Gemma's mum and dad run a corner shop. After taxes and benefits, which they don't get any benefits, and paying for their accommodation, which is low because they've owned the flat above the shop for a long time, so then they've got a tiny mortgage, £86 a week, if I can remember. They have £25,000 each spare a year, disposable, 50,000 in total. So that's child number 7. They could afford just to send Gemma to a private school, but not necessarily her sister as well. Or they could beg the grandparents just, and there's a lot about the grandparents. But if they sent them private, there'd be no money. They don't actually have a holiday. They do, I think, send Gemma on a holiday, or one of them does. But of course, they're running a corner shop, so one of them always has to be working. And this is an example of your typical family of the best of child out of 7. So it's not my world, it's not Polly's world, it may not be your world. I'm sitting in the 2%. The children above Gemma, and in the middle of the top 2 million, you are in the 7th top percentile. I tried to be not this boring in the book, it's really hard, but...
It's not boring at all,
okay.
It's very potent.
So above them you've got the children of the 6th percentile, the 5th, the 4th, the 3rd, the 2nd, which is Boris Johnson's children when he was Prime Minister, and the 1st, which is Boris Johnson's children when he was not Prime Minister. Those 6 children out of 100 live in families which take 34.3% of all national income. And that's an underestimate. So when you were showing that pie chart, what you have to remember is that's only 2/3 of our national income. A third of that chart, half of that chart, a third of our income, is just taken by the top 6 out of every 100 children. Our 7 children don't include my children, university professors' children. And it's just trying to get this over.
Say that again. 6 out of 100 children
live in families which take 34.3% of all income, a third. And wait for it, we're only talking at the moment about families with kids under 18. Once you get out of that, I'm always trying to be careful about talking about my own family, but I had 3 kids. It's in Who's Who, I had 3 kids, so I'm posh, right? I had 3 kids, none of them is a child anymore. So, as a household, my household is no longer included in this. Most of the income and money in Britain goes to people who do not have children under 18, right? We have absolutely impoverished our children, unbelievably. And nobody has said to me, Danny, look, you've got no kids under 18. We're going to take another 10% off you. They could. My life honestly wouldn't get worse. I'd be happy with it as long as they did it to everybody else. So all this is about families with children under 18. And a huge amount of it is simply about distribution. We have become poorer. We have had a massive cost of living crisis, which turns everything desperate, because it was already bad, and then suddenly things cost 30% more than they used to. But the money's here. I mean, you can look out tonight. It's a Thursday night in London. You walk up through Soho and just watch the money spent on the drink. The money's in the country. It's just that we don't think the children are worth it, so they're becoming shorter. Yeah. But it's really, the politics are brutal.
When you try to write at all about redistributing between the old and the young, for instance, explosive response, even from Guardian readers. That's an outrage. Much less and the recent outrage about the winter fuel allowance, all right, there's a group of people just above pension credit who will be hit quite hard. Absolutely not taking in that, 9 out of a classroom of 30 children are poor, are below the poverty line. Is that right?
Yeah, and the children are the future. I mean, the way I would have done
if you're talking about growth and investment.
Yeah, the way I would have done it with the winter fuel payments would be to say, why did the Conservatives always leave them there? And I think, and I always credit Conservatives for being cleverer than you might think. I think the Tories kept the winter fuel allowances for all pensioners, so that very affluent pensioners, the best 20%, who are receiving this from the government, would think, well, if I'm getting this, what a generous government this is. They must be giving more money to poorer people, so the poor must just be feckless.
Exactly so. Yeah. I mean, the idea, and some people on the left have said, universal benefits are wonderful because it binds in better off people. It doesn't at all. Yeah. I mean, the number of people who say, either, if they're Guardian readers, I give it away to charity, or there was the editor of the Spectator wrote about, I think he buys the most expensive bottle of wine that he can buy with his winter fuel allowance, and invites a couple of friends around to drink this most expensive bottle, saying, isn't this absurd? What a ludicrous world we live in when people like me are given money to, I think so it doesn't really work psychologically.
It doesn't work, but I think it helped the Conservatives get votes, because it helped people think, how can you claim they're not being nice on welfare when I'm getting this? I think they'll work out their exit route from it. It was question time, I think, yesterday, where Sunak was claiming 3,850 deaths were going to occur, which is minuscule compared to the 200,000 due to his government from austerity. It's interesting to see Sunak suddenly cares about people dying. Yeah. It has absolutely no need. I know about the.
Oh, if we started quantifying the value of deaths, then you get into very different territory where children really are valuable.
Oh,
The fact that infant mortality has risen for the first time, and
there are now only 5 countries in Eastern Europe that have got worse neonatal mortality than we have.
Yeah.
I mean, and part of this is cock-up. You know, it is not that the Conservatives are so callous. They actually look, you know, how can we make it so that we have this number of deaths? It's the little boy who died in Skegness in January. You know, there were 80 of those in the National Child Mortality Database. Not necessarily dying of starvation of first next to left dead father age 60, and that made some headlines for 2 weeks, but then went away. If we can remember Jennifer's ear. Jennifer's, I don't swear, but Jennifer's ear went on for months. It was about an ear, not about a dead child. You know, we are in a different kind of territory to what we were dealing with decades ago, and it is worse.
well, that's what I wanted to particularly ask you about, because it's, I mean, I'm not nearly as much as you, nor with such expertise, but most of my life in one way or another, trying to write about poverty, inequality, and how people should think about it, and trying to persuade people, don't seem to have made very much headway. When it comes, for instance, to attitudes towards the 2-child benefit cap, huge outrage and indignation about it. You know, it's one of the most disgraceful benefit policies. 60% of people in the country agree with it, according to YouGov. 50% of Labour voters agree with it. They say, why should people have extra benefits of extra babies on benefits? I can't afford an extra baby. Why should they? And it takes a whole, you know, citizens' assembly to explain to people the injustice of this, that lots of these people,
we become more callous.
Well, what do we do about that? How do we set about persuading people? What are the mechanisms? I mean, you write these wonderful books time after time, and each one cleverly coming at it from a different point of view, and all of them utterly readable. I mean, this is compelling, not just for its facts, but for the way you write it. What more should we do? We now have a government, at least of good intent, in that everybody you talk to in the Labour government, whether it's Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer, they are all absolutely certain that they will reduce child poverty, and I'm sure they will.
And their MPs are going back on a Friday. I would say cynically, at least a majority of them are going back to the constituencies. Okay, cynically, some of them have never been to those constituencies, but the majority do know their constituency. They go back on a Friday, and they are the representatives of the poorest people in the UK.
Yep.
And unless you're the most soulless member of Parliament in Labour and you do not do your surgeries on a Friday, you're going to see this.
Yeah.
And that makes it, that's why I think it's almost impossible for them not to do good. Because how can you do that? You don't need them all to be saints. You just need a majority of the parliamentary party to talk to their constituents.
I mean, every Labour government has always increased the situation of the poor, whether it's the old or
and
the
spent
young.
more on the NHS.
And the last one did, and increased the quality of public services.
And it was a 1922, not in government, but Labour leader was a change. You could go back and you can see this in the 20s and 30s, and you can also see the oscillations and the drama in the Labour Party at the same time. So the danger is in England, only in England, not in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland. In England, we're going to become American. Or we're on the way there, where we can't run a proper poverty survey in America. Because a proper poverty survey is you ask people, should children have shoes? Should they have 2 pairs of shoes? Should they go cold? Should people have a holiday for a week? And the answers you get in the USA are, well, only if their parents work hard. In the rest of Europe, we can do these surveys, and then you produce a benchmark over what everybody should have, a baseline, which Rowntree did 100 years ago, which included, slightly biasedly, everybody should be able to afford a hot chocolate at night, because Rowntree made them, but also a penny stamp to send a letter to a loved one. That was a marginal item, partly because Seaborn Rowntree wrote 3 letters to his wife a day. And the marginal item now is the mobile phone at age 11 or 14. There's always a marginal item.
What's the marginal item?
Mobile phone at 11
A
years
mobile
old.
phone.
Oh, in London.
But the adult needs one, and they need them. They need them for their homework.
It's always disputable. In London, you are poor if you cannot afford to eat out once a week. Eat out means fish and chips, or just. But it's now
Which
so.
is not cheap.
No, but it's now so. But it's about norms of society. The danger is we move to the US model where there isn't an idea of the norms of society if there are people dying on the streets where they haven't tried hard enough. And the danger is we're there. I was involved this morning in an email debate in Scotland where it's different, where there is still a pact between the Scottish Labour Party and the SNP not to debate the Scottish child payment. So there, the third and fourth child get money and they get more money. And in theory, no child need goes cold and
They
hungry.
get an extra £20 a week.
£25 gone up now.
£25 a week given by the Scottish government that isn't given by the English government to the English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So every child.
And it makes a lot of difference because when children lost that,
Yeah.
they were given it for a bit during COVID. When it was taken away again,
huge.
it had a devastating effect.
So every child in Scotland, which is 2 out of 7, and hence fits my 7 children on, every child was in a family receiving any form of benefit gets 20, well, it's gone up now, but it was £25 a week for every child under 16, completely untapered. You lose nothing from getting this. For a family of 3, that's almost £4,000 a year. That £4,000 a year, which is entirely affordable, it's a tiny bit of extra tax on university professors and consultants. That £4,000 a year that means that no child in Scotland need go hungry or cold. It was the real legacy of Nicola Sturgeon.
Yep.
You know, she wanted 2 things. A woman from Glasgow, Wham fan. She wanted independence, which she didn't get, but she wanted to have a material and massive effect on poverty. And it annoyed me that she so wanted independence that they never celebrated. And we could copy this. You know, it's not like pointing to Finland and saying, can we be like them or Sweden or, you know, it's not, Scotland isn't very far away. You know, we could do it. And I wouldn't be surprised, really wouldn't, that the current government in 2 years' time, once it's begun to move and seen and got evidence and just, and none of this is radical. This is basic middle of the road social democratic politics.
I mean, they could take up, but no government ever has, they could take up the Joseph Rowntree minimum
that's much more expensive
level, which is much more expensive. But it's very good. Every year they have a big public opinion poll. What should the minimum be? Yes, you were talking about, and it's it's just for a basic decent quality of life.
Yeah, and it's that one is done by these questions. It's done with
one self-catering holiday a year for 1 week.
Oh, my favourite.
2 pairs of shoes.
It's qualitative research done with Argos catalogues. Enormous hours of work. And my favourite example from a few years ago was that the general public believe that the pensioner should be able to afford a bird feeder, a single wire metal bird feeder. But the grain they might put in that's discretionary. They shouldn't have enough money to put the grain in the bird feeder. If they want to put grain in, they have to go hungry themselves or cut back on something else. But can you imagine the effort of talking to people about a washing machine, a dryer,
and a bird feeder?
Oh, you're allowed under the minimum income standards a babysitter 3 times a year. That's in the book. 3 times a year, you should be able to afford a babysitter. Even say how much you should pay them. It should be okay to go out 3 times a year. Everybody in Britain with children should, and that's more expensive than what they're doing in Scotland.
Yeah.
And that's Loughborough University, and the most brilliant study for decades, and they keep going.
Before I throw it open to Bri, I'm just going to ask you about the other end of the scale. Nice line here. Controlling the few. This is talking about the 9,000 people in the UK who have an income of over 1 million each.
Yeah.
Controlling the few is a political as much as a national economic necessity.
Yeah.
So explain what you mean about controlling them.
We, in our past, I think, and partly not by design, but by 2 world wars, stopped listening to the very best of. And when they complained, as the young men did in Brighton we visited, I mean, they were incensed, and so was Ward, the author, about what's changing. If you read Hansard from 1945, the new Labour government they were so posh. They had double-barreled names, these Labour MPs, most of them. They weren't the horny, handed sons of toil or miners. But their language was very, very clear and determined. But they were from rich backgrounds, but they weren't listening to the richer people than them anymore. And from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and quite a lot of the 70s, we did that. And then we began to listen to multimillionaires and the think tanks that they funded and the poison, I think, they put in. Other European countries do a very good job, most of them, of controlling their extremely rich to not allow them to dominate the debate. They always have more than their fair share. There are 5 countries in Europe which are now more equal than the Nordic 5, including Belgium. So more equal than Finland and Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Iceland. There are another 5 which are almost as equal, which includes France and Germany. And they take their very affluent with a pinch of salt and don't necessarily let them own newspapers and bow down to them. And at some point, if we are going to recover and get better, we have to do that. And that does mean not for the Labour Party, which at the end of the day, this comes down and will come down to the Labour Party until we get PR for decades. It means being very careful about those companies that will be there at the party conference and the money and who's behind that. Because there's a danger that there are people who think this is okay. Largely, I want to be generous, largely because they are not aware of how bad it is. But they think it makes us productive and we will get growth, and out of growth, everything will get better. And you have to, at some point, say this hasn't worked. And a philosophy of, the market is best. And it almost, I don't want to be mean to the USA, but we bought it from, or they bought it. Gordon Brown used to holiday every summer in the USA. And Gordon was our more radical person than Tony, but his latest book is written with 2 financiers about how world finance will save the world. It's not, so part of this is Labour getting its soul back, getting its hands dirty, working out that it is going to have to tax the rich, and it shouldn't apologise for that.
Well, we'll see in the budget how far they go. I mean, it's interesting to see how far the right-wing press and the financial press and the business pages are warning everybody that, sucking great taxes are coming their way on the pensions of the best off, inheritance tax.
Yeah. Oh, my tax relief on my pension. I'm in USS.
Enormous. Yeah.
My tax relief on my ISA.
Yeah.
This is me.
Yeah.
And we need a government saying, but it isn't a theft if it's done to everybody. It's simply an adjustment, and I'll get a nicer country. If you were to take many tens of thousands of pounds from me, just me, that wouldn't be very fair, and I'd be upset. But as long as you take that money away from everybody like me, and slightly more from people better off than me, my position in this country gets no worse at all. I can buy the same bungalow in future. It won't cost me more. You can tax somebody like me more. And okay, I couldn't have lots of cruise holidays. I couldn't own another house in Spain, right? But inside Britain, my position in the pecking order would be just as good. And Labour need to try to explain this.
Well, let's see if anyone wants to add one first.
Thank you.